Hello and welcome to this video in which I'd like to share my thoughts on the plans I made for reading and watching in January. I usually try not to include any major spoilers and I will do the same for everything in this video too. To start with, I will recap as a list what I had intended to get to. I selected 4 books and 5 things to watch, some of which were from my jar. The books were A Taste of Golden Iron, Nickleby, Never Let Me Go and Captive Prince, which is the first in one of my favourite series. I tracked my progress with a table which I will have included in this video on the screen. It's not that fancy, but I found it fun to find shapes to represent each thing. As for books, I managed to read all but one, and that was due to it being unavailable at that time from my library. There were 2 books that were quite long, and Nickleby took me a while as it has 65 chapters. I planned to finish the Untamed, the first season of Hero Mask, the 2019 film adaptation of Little Women, Angel Beats, which was being removed from Netflix here, and finally I was most excited to rewatch the first season of Tokyo Ghoul. I was able to watch everything that I had planned and think that overall January's selections were a mix of average and top tier. I will talk about the books I read first and then focus on what I watched afterwards. Never Let Me Go was the book that was unavailable from my library when I was ready to read it. But as I have read it before, I can say that I remember liking parts of it, but last time I wasn't really sure whether I liked it or not. I mainly wanted to reread it as I would like to read more by Kazuo Ishiguro in the future, and I liked Clara and the Sun. Now I can talk about the rest of the books mentioned in my TBR section for January. The first I will review is A Taste of Golden Iron by Alexandra Rowland, which I read as an ebook from my library. It is a fantasy romance, and as referred to in the title, it has characters who can touch taste metal, which is used to unravel the mystery around a conspiracy involving counterfeiting. I rated it 3 stars as I think it had poor pacing and the chapters were too long. It often felt like nothing much was happening, which is more of a shame because I liked the characters and the world building. The plot was interesting and I did predict the culprits, but I personally quite like it when I can do that, however easy or difficult it is. The next 2 books I will talk about both have dodgy uncles in common. Nickleby by Charles Dickens is the first. Before I go on to say what it's about, I just wanted to highlight the character Mrs. Nickleby, who was a bit of a comic relief character and reminds me a bit of Mrs. Bennet from Pride and Prejudice. It was quite funny to have vegetables thrown over the wall for her in a gesture of romance. For an overview of the plot, Nickleby covers the lives of a family that are left in difficult circumstances after the death of Mr. Nickleby, who is Nicholas's father, as well as being about friendships they make through difficult times. It's quite easy to follow the plot, even with switching between plot lines. As is usual with Dickens, it was witty throughout, while also having a mix of both very kind characters and the complete opposite. The last book I will talk about before reviewing what I watched is Captive Prince, which is the first in the series. I actually read it on my Kindle, but it's easier right now to hold up the paperback, and I did read the extra story, which is exclusive to this paperback. I should start by saying there are a lot of trigger warnings for this series and it can be unsettling at times regardless. But nevertheless, I personally loved the plot and the wit throughout. Although difficult to read at times with the content, I think it is written in a way that highlights how corrupt the kingdom has become. Aside from that, I love the relationship between the main characters, who go from being enemies to doing anything to save each other by the end of the series. It follows a prince who is trying to take back control from his uncle, the regent, with a lot of mind games and personal trauma. Although the series is categorised as romance, it's definitely not very present in the first book. The character Laurent is not particularly likeable in this first one, but there are reasons for his behaviour, and it doesn't really reflect all his great qualities. I feel like this book is more of a setup for the rest of the series. As with the rest of the series, it has a lot of clever twists and a good pace. The Captive Prince series is one that I love rereading and would be one that I would go to if I was getting into a bit of a reading slump. I will now move on to speak about everything that I plan to watch in January. The Untamed had been selected in my October TBR last year, and I have been making progress since then, but I am finally able to discuss it in more detail. The Untamed is a Chinese drama, which is an adaptation of the novel series titled in English as Grandmaster of Demonic Cultivation. It's well worth sticking with it, and considering there are 50 episodes of nearly an hour, it has good pacing and it's very intriguing. There are lots of twists in the plot, and there is fantastic relationships between the characters, especially the main ones. It's definitely a favourite and easy to re-watch, as well as making you want to read the novels. I also love when character themes play in the background of scenes. It gets sadder as it goes on, but there are great moments too, as the main characters try to solve the mystery of the past. The first selection from the jar in January was Hero Mask, and so I watched the first of 2 seasons. In the opening sequence, there are really cool designs for different masks that look a bit like origami, and it is a great way to start each episode. The masks give different abilities and were meant to help humanity. The series is set in a fictional London and involves a suspicious company with an unknown motive. It is a great detective anime with an intriguing plot, which I did, however, enjoy more the first time I watched it. 3 stars is the general feeling I get towards it, as it's great, but it doesn't personally appeal to me in the same way that a different genre would at the moment. It's good to watch at least once. It's not too long and worth trying if detective stories are interesting to you. I will watch the second part in the future. I also watched the 2019 film adaptation of Little Women in January. It's a really good adaptation of the classic, and I only gave it 4 stars for my personal preference, in comparison to other things that I currently love more. But there are scenes that stick with me, and I would be happy to rewatch it. I like the story, and the acting is great, as it brings out the down-to-earth ups and downs of life, with varied personalities and emotions. Although it works in a way, and I can see the reason for it, I would have preferred it to not switch between timelines, as I don't personally like that much. And as I mentioned earlier, the reason I watched Angel Beats in January was because it was being removed from Netflix and I wanted to see it again, as I had enjoyed it the one time I'd seen it before. I still think it is a good anime, and it's also about dealing with lingering emotions. This anime is set in a high school where the characters are technically dead and are kept from moving on due to memories from their past. Most of the plot is much more light-hearted and fun while I battle against an enemy in the school, keeping in mind that they can't die there. As the series goes on, the characters learn to make peace with their past, and there are more emotional moments. I also think the ending theme reflects the change quite well and has emotion too. I would rate it 4 stars, as it's something I would still rewatch and spend time and money on, and for liking the music, plot and the characters. The last selection from the jar for January was the anime Tokyo Ghoul, and so I watched the first season of it. Tokyo Ghoul is one of my favourite anime series and became so after I only watched it once. I had previously wanted to rewatch it, but then the first 2 seasons were removed from Netflix, but it's now back. I especially love the fact that Kaneki likes books, and I love the idea of having a favourite author where you can rely on liking all their books and go back to them. Apart from that, I love the music and the story, which has admirable characters in a world where humans and ghouls are against each other. I'm looking forward to continuing with the rest of the series. I also thought I would mention that I won't be making plans for February like in previous months, because no matter what I tell myself, I end up putting pressure on myself to try and finish everything, which I struggle with, even if it may not seem like a lot. I enjoy making selections from the jar, but I feel more comfortable talking about things after I know more about them from having read or watched them recently. And sometimes, like in January, the library books don't always cooperate with the TBR either. Also, I tend to prefer to continue a series straight away once I've started it, where possible, and would I like to finish the series that I read or watched the first part of in January, rather than wait for them to be selected from the jar. I think I may just make a video once I have finished a certain amount, rather than every month. Well, thank you very much for watching, which I greatly appreciate, and please consider pressing the like button, commenting and subscribing, as it helps, and I'd love the interaction. I wish you all the best, and I'll be back with another video after more reading and watching.